Welcome to 20 Minute Tabletop, a podcast sharing the love of all things tabletop gaming in bite-sized pieces. I'm your host, John Wiki, here today with my co-host, Stevie.
Let's step into a series we're calling Stevie's Clue-niverse, with one of many editions of a classic game, Clue. Today we're talking about Clue Master Detective, so put on your thinking caps, grab your sharpened number 2 pencil, and let's solve a murder.
Let's turn to a reliable source of what is this game, the back of the box. First introduced in the 1980s, Clue Master Detective is a supersized version of Clue. More suspects, more weapons, and more possible murder locations all add up to more mayhem. Like classic Clue, you're solving the mystery of the murder of Mr. Body, finding out who did it, where, and what was their weapon of choice.
So let's start with our first impressions of this souped-up version of Clue.
Well, I think it's Stevie's Clue-niverse, so I think you should go first.
Obviously, there's even more Clue to love.
I think it's really a fun expansion on a classic.
So, how easy is it to set up?
Setup works like classic Clue. Every player starts by selecting a token representing one of their suspects. All tokens are placed in the cloakroom to start regardless of the number of players. Regardless of whoever's playing, bring out all the weapons, put them off to the side. You take all 30 cards and sort them into their 3 piles. You have your suspects, your locations, your weapons. You shuffle those groups up, and then you select the top card off and place them inside the confidential envelope and set it aside. Now, this is the answer to the question of who, where, and how. Then you take those cards, mix up the remaining, deal them out to everybody. Some players may get more cards. That's just the way it happens. And then these are what you use to start what you know who is not it, and what was not used, and where it did not occur. Every player takes their detective sheet. You can mark down what you already know, and then you start. Simply roll the dice and work your way around the board.
So it's basically like classic Clue, just with more options for who did it, what they used, and where.
There's some differences when we get into the actual gameplay, but overall it's just more of the same.
So speaking of, let's talk about game mechanics. So how are we going to solve this murder mystery?
So as we said, the base of the game operates like classic Clue. Everyone controls their character, moves around the mansion, and when you enter a room, you can make an accusation of who committed the crime. So you choose a person, move them into that room, and then choose the weapon they used. You can declare it was Madame Rose with the poison in the carriage house. Those don't sound familiar? Well, you have 12 locations, 8 weapons, and 10 characters now.
So in addition to Colonel Mustard, Professor Plum, Mr. Green, Mrs. Peacock, Miss Scarlet, Mrs. White, this edition adds Madame Rose, Sergeant Grey, Monsieur Brunette, and Miss Peach to our suspect list.
And of course, you have your classic weapons, the knife, the candlestick, the revolver, the rope, the lead pipe, the wrench. But you also have the poison, and you have a horseshoe, because you have a carriage house, so why wouldn't you have a horseshoe?
And then your locations include the courtyard, the gazebo, the drawing room, the dining room, the kitchen, the carriage house, the trophy room, the conservatory, the studio, the billiard room, the library, and the fountain. And you'll notice that a lot of those are the originals, again, just with some additions such as the gazebo, the carriage house, and the fountain.
I like it because the board now steps outside the mansion a little bit, but stays on the ground, so it still kind of has that fit and feel. I also like that you have to go through the outside through one area to get to some of the others. So they're not even all interconnected in the same way. So it's kind of a little bit of a pass through, which kind of, I think, adds a fun aspect to it. When you want to make a suggestion, you choose a person, a weapon, and the location that you're in, as we mentioned earlier. And from there, you go around player to player and allow them to show you something that disproves what you're saying.
Right, and at that point, it's about tracking what you know and strategic guessing. So, because you go to your right to have people disprove you, if you know some of the cards the person to your right has, you want to start guessing outside of that realm to help you figure out more information.
Yeah, it's just as important to know who disproved something as it is just know that that is not one to choose. Now, the way we played it was as soon as someone showed you a card, you stopped. The actual rules do say that you call out and each person will show you one of their cards if they can disprove it. The thing you need to watch out for is if you're going through and all three people are showing you something, everybody at the table now knows those three things are not it. And so they can all mark them down as well. So you have to be careful in what you're guessing. That's where sometimes you use your own things that you already know are not going to be there.
Let's talk about the addition of the snoop spaces in this edition.
This is something I really like. So there are 9 spaces around the board with a magnifying glass. And that allows you to snoop on an opponent. What that means is they have to fan out their cards. You draw one sight unseen, get to look at it, and give it back to them. And it can happen anywhere during your movement. So if you have movement left over after snooping, you can keep on going if you had a larger roll.
This allows you to gather information and continue moving at the same time.
And it's really fun if you haven't been getting a lot of information from one player in particular, you can use this to hopefully get some more. Now, it's luck of the draw. You may draw a card that they've already shown you, so you don't get new information, but it's a fun little addition there. The last part is, as you're going through, after you make those suggestions, you figure out who it is. The winner is whoever solves it first, whoever solves the mystery of who killed Mr. Bobby, in what room, and what weapon they used.
Whoever solves it correctly.
Yes, you're not solving it if you solve it incorrectly.
If you're incorrect and you look at the cards, though, you are out of the game. You look at the cards in the top secret file. So that is, make sure you're right before you make that accusation, because I have seen people be burned by that, where they're absolutely certain they're right, and they look in that file and they're wrong, and they're done.
I also want to share some strategies for Super Sleuths that come actually directly from the book. Some of these are ones that we've used, and they're kind of really good to call out. So one is, don't forget to snoop. When your dice rolls large enough, you can snoop and still enter a location in the same move.
Another one is making suggestions. So you may want to name one or more of your own cards in order to gain information or to mislead your opponents. And it has worked in the past. You guess something that's in your hand because you know whatever is going to be shown won't include that piece of information.
Proving a suggestion. It is possible in one turn to show all 3 cards. However, that's not always advantage because all the players heard. So this is what we talked about. If you prove all 3 things and no one shows anything, you could have been proving your suggestion. Now everyone knows that. Now, if you're putting your own cards in there, that can throw them off. So you don't want to try and absolutely suggest what you think is the right answer. Otherwise, everybody knows it then.
Your detective notebook. So be sure to note what you've learned on your detective notebook. They call out something that I've actually been doing for years, and it says you may find it helpful to put the initials of which players showed you which cards. And I've been doing this for as long as I can remember, so that when I do make suggestions, I know, oh, this person has this card, so I don't want to say that. That's the person immediately to my right, so I don't want to say that piece of information, or if they're smart, they're going to keep showing me the same card.
When you're starting to track who has what, when you're putting those initials down to say that, okay, when I passed it and Stevie showed me that it wasn't Sergeant Gray, that's great. But if I've tracked it and I know that she's done that when she makes a suggestion and she says Sergeant Gray is her suspect, I know she's not trying to find that answer because I know she already has that card. And sometimes if you do that right, if they put 2 of their cards in there, you can know the third thing is what they're actually guessing. And then you know if someone shows them a card, you know it has to be that one card. So you can actually uncover things on other people's turns when they make their suggestions.
You're going into like advanced strategy here for, your really intense Clue players.
Well, if you're playing Clue, you've got to play intense.
At least if you're playing against me.
And the last suggestion they call out is the sneaky move. This is one personally that our son hates. If your opponent's token appears to be heading to an important location, on your turn, you may want to include that suspect in a suggestion in order to move him or her away from that location. So when you suggest someone, their piece comes to the room. So you move them away from where they were to now where you are. So if they're trying to go to a location because they really want to suggest that location, you've pulled them away from it. It's a bit of, harsher strategy at times.
It's almost like the like a strategic version of sorry, right? Instead of bumping the person's piece back to their home, you're pulling them away from where they're trying to get to. So, let's talk about how much we enjoy the game. Obviously, this is Clue. I love it. I love each and every version of Clue I've come across in my life. What I really like about this one is the expansions make the gameplay last a little longer. For those of us who do enjoy the game, the expansion kind of gives you more to work with, but also more that you need to deduce and figure out. So it does allow gameplay to last longer, and for me, the more time I spend playing Clue, the happier I am.
I really love the strategy of Clue. There's a lot of logic on how you guess. And in case you haven't figured out by the tips we're talking about, that's the part I love. I love trying to apply that logic to figure out what it is, who people are guessing. There are times where I'll mark dots by things because I'm like, well, I think they have this one, but maybe it's this one, and try to like really zero in. So even if I don't know for sure, I get closer and closer to that. I love that part of the game, and this one just gives you more of that. Like, I like the extra complexity of having more characters, having more suspects, having more locations to work at. But you have different locations laid out in different ways, so you have to go out and around to get to some of those new locations they've added on. They're not just all moving around the board, and these are all side by side around the outside of this square.
So, length of play. I think when we played, it took us about 30 minutes to solve the mystery.
That sounds about right. Yeah, it all depends really on that strategy you're applying, how quickly you're moving, who you're playing with, how many players.
Right. I could easily see for less experienced Clue players or players who maybe are not as hardcore competitive as we are, it taking closer to, 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how quickly you're moving through the board and how much you're taking advantage of the various additions like the Snoop spaces. But I definitely think when we played, there were 4 of us, John, myself, and our 2 children. I think it took right around a half hour. So, some special notes on the game include the fact that the original version has a film that was made in the 80s that is kind of a cult classic. I know that a lot of my nerdy friends have watched it and enjoyed it. Both my children enjoy it greatly. And it's kind of like a slapstick comedy. The best part is it's a lot of big names in there, like Tim Curry, Martin Mull, etc.
Yes, that movie is fantastic.
Where Mrs. Peacock is an eccentric senator's wife who panics at the thought of being poisoned.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. And actually, that's one thing that, we're not going to go through all of it here, but in this booklet with this version, not sure if it includes in all the other versions, your mileage will vary. But in this version, they actually have biographies for all of the people in here. It's not just a blue-colored piece, a red-colored piece. It tells that Mrs. Peacock single-handedly stopped a loggerhead strike from extinction and, is an ornithologist, and she's asking Mr. Body to create a bird sanctuary to protect and donating his estate to the Peacock Salvation Society, who she's a member. So, did she kill him for greed?
An item of special interest is that they're actually currently going through a reboot of Clue. If you go to Instagram and you look up at Clue, C-L-U-E, they have an Instagram account where they're detailing how they are updating the game, not just in terms of bringing it into sort of modern times, but they're also giving the characters richer backgrounds and giving them more reasons to be connected to the Body family.
I think it's about time for final impressions. I'll go first to let you have the last say. I'm just going to say classic fun.
My final impression is there's just more Clue to love. If this is a game you enjoy, this is a game you'll enjoy probably even more because there's more of it. There's more logic, more strategy, more options. And there's a reason we have a series called Stevie's Clue-niverse, because if it's a version of Clue, I'm probably going to love it.
The little tweaks that they put into the different versions, I think, are what make them fun on their own standalone. Like this one has its own little things that it added to the game.
So yeah, I think my final impression would be described as the little emoji with the heart eyes and then the little emoji with the star eyes.
I'm your host, John Wiki, and you can find me on Twitter as John_Wiki, Wickee.
And I'm Stevie. You can find me on Instagram as Stevies_games.
20-Minute Tabletop is a Morecore Studios production. Theme song by Arthur Rowan, Morecore art by Ceda Duncan. Do you want more tabletop gaming fun? Subscribe to 20-Minute Tabletop on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Find out more on our website, 20mintabletop.com. That's the numbers 20mintabletop.com. Or connect with us on Twitter and Instagram at 20mintabletop. That's at 20mintabletop. Thank you, and roll with fortune.
Clue, 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 clue.